Welcome to The Krystal Effect. I'm your host, Krystal Appleby, and I'm here to share honest, wild truths I've learned through being a practitioner for myself and others on this crazy journey of life, career, and relating. I'm not crazier, braver, bolder, or more experienced than others. Rather, I do believe I'm here to share with a deeper level of honesty than most. It's just who I am. Superficiality and mediocrity are pure boredom here, and I do believe the deepest truths and depths of our soul will set us and others free. With an allergy to anything withheld in connection and conversation, we're going to dive right into any limits or lies we tell ourselves, pierced through the mediocrity or fears of diving deep into the truth. I hope to give you an opportunity to reactivate your knowing and zeal for living, rather than to be triggered, squander life and joy, and shrink away out of my energy field. But as always, choice is yours. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Pivot Party. I'm so excited and so stoked to share this conversation with you, to share my dear friend Mike Elliott, such a leader and expert and wise soul in the field of relationships, but also what he's built in his career, out of his career, through his business journey, and just this energy that he brings to the world, to every interaction he has, to all of his friendships. He is such a bright, big beacon of light that brings so much wisdom. After this conversation, I had a 2-hour nap, went into my own process of shifting and changing things that came up for me in the conversation. And that is really the magic that is Mike. He pierces through and sees to the deepest truth and then brings it to light and implodes any shadow within there. Thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me, Mike. I just value you and your friendship and your expertise so much, what you're doing out in the world. I'll leave all the information if you want to connect deeper with Mike. He is an incredible leader and coach in the relationship space. He's highly intuitive. Nothing gets past him. So buckle up and get ready as we dive into this episode around what it's taken us to leave the 9 to 5, to take those pivotal steps and continue to pivot every step along the way, through the fear, through the self-limiting beliefs, through the safety and security of a paycheck, through all of it. Buckle up and enjoy this one. Once again, thanks so much, Mike. Let's dive in. Welcome to episode 6 of The Krystal Effect. I'm your host, Krystal Appleby, and I'm joined by my dear friend, Mike Elliott. Do you want to just take it away?
Yeah, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. Thanks for having me on the show. And just for all of you listening, just a little bit about me. I'm Mike Elliott. I am an intuitive coach. That's my background, who specializes kind of in the relational space. So I'm a relationship expert, and just some background, like my zone of genius, which is my imagining is a theme we'll kind of touch in today, is to really love to help orient people in their life to create more stability. In their relationship to self, their relationship to their purpose, relationship to their partner, relationship to their body and their well-being. Just the relationship to living life is where I'm the most passionate. So I love that we're diving into work today to go into this relationship with like business. The relationship to Dharma is, another word that I love to weave in here. So
yeah, thank you for that. And that's really ties into, how we've gotten to know each other. And I think what we really connect a lot over is this piece of over the years, how many times you've helped me shift in like different relationships, from parents to partners to calling in partners, and really like shining light on all of these, naturally shining light and imploding all of these places where I'm holding myself captive, really. And you've brought such a different insight into my world around relationship and that space, and the different ways it shows up in our life and how it all ties in together. And I think the latest passion for me is how it ties into our business, how it ties into every offer we put out. I was just creating an offer and kind of got feedback from one of my mentors this week. I'm like, I always kind of stop at this stage and I need like 2 weeks to integrate. Once I've like not necessarily launched something, but put something out to the world, got feedback, people are coming in, they want my energy. And then I like go into a little bit of freeze and need to go sit in the mountain and just like, woof.
Yeah. And
after I said it, I was like, oh, it's the same place in relationship. It's literally the same place. When it comes time to sustain it, I'm like, this is a lot. So I love how, relationship really shows up absolutely everywhere in our life, and how the more that time has gone on and our friendship has grown over the years, we've kind of come into those different places now where we're both in a space of like falling in love with business and different aspects of it and what it gets to mean and who we're here to be.
Yeah. And I love that piece of just like bringing those, those innate gifts that we all have, like more online, so that the business we're creating is just more easeful, more enjoyable, more fulfilling, more resourcing instead of that like grinding, efforting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And one thing that I know we'll get into it around the masculine and the feminine, but something I've
Mhm.
really admired about you over the years from, your time in Fort McMurray to now. It's like I look back to even then, and something that I was probably envious at the time, but like really admired was you'd be like getting up and doing your stocks and stuff, and like you had this piece around money fucking figured out. Like it wasn't sticky, it wasn't something that you were like trying to hide in a corner. And I think that's a really big gift to a lot of people in business that, you know, I always felt like wherever you've gone, you've had that piece of like structure. And I don't know if that, I know it's the
Mhm.
masculine partially,
Mhm.
but there's like a stability in that, which I
Mhm.
will say you're probably the only Aries that I've met like that.
That's hilarious. And like for anyone who's listening, if you're in Krystal's world, my imagining is you're related to human design and gene keys. And my sense is, and thank you for the reflection, my sense is you're tapping into my life's work, because the whole, like my whole branding, when we go into the Pearl sequence, my life's work, like what I'm meant to offer is stability.
Ooh,
That's like what I'm here to do, is like to stabilize the field for myself, and then for that to be, something that inspires and that I guide other people to stabilize in. Like, hey, let's look at the pieces that are destabilizing and figure out how to stabilize that.
that's so interesting because I think back to, I like when we first met, and that's really what you helped me through. But it was triggering, like really triggering when you don't want to
Yep.
be stabilized, when you don't want to like look at your finances, when you don't
Yeah.
want to put these things on the table. That can be super triggering. So I'm curious then, if you're here to stabilize the field, then as we like, the evolution with Gene Keys is kind of, we are going to start in the shadow, is my belief, right? Is
Yeah.
like, right, at some point in our life we're usually starting out in the shadow and learning to evolve through. What's the shadow frequency of it?
So the shadow frequency is control.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's control, it's the gift of authority, and then it's the city of valor. And so how I've watched the control piece play out is where it's like the almost needing and trying to control the environment to feel stability. But then there becomes an evolution and a spiral up of the discomfort of watching how that impacts others. And then the shame that is eventually felt of like how attached I am to controlling the environment. It becomes an evolution of, I really need to master my own internal domain and all of the areas of my own life. Like I have to deeply build healthy relationship with all aspects of my life so that I can spill over and support that for other people and guide people into the ways that I figured that out. And I have so much that I don't have figured out, but there's areas that you named where it's like money has been a focus for me for a long time. And there's always another layer of learning, as I start to build a family and build out bigger business. But I'm so passionate at figuring out what's needed and required to stabilize. Like, how do I step into my own energy of authority over my own thoughts, my emotions, and then choose what's required and needed from a responsible place to create the stability instead of the impulse of wanting to just do whatever that destabilizes, that puts me into more of the shadow of, well, now I need to try and control because I'm actually destabilized.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think that's like a beautiful segue into, as you talk about the shadow, I feel like this is something you offer to the world. So we're just going to
Mhm.
go there
Cool.
because you offer that aspect or that viewpoint for people, how they can move. And when you're speaking, I'm like, oh, this is what you just talked about with like that zone of competence as they move from that place of like, I've been in this space in this 9 to 5 that's not really fulfilling me, but it once
Mhm.
did. Can I get that back? Or like trying to kind of Tetris within that zone. That sounds like to me like that's kind of that shadow frequency of that we're here to evolve out of. So maybe just sharing a little bit of your journey of like being in that space and what it took to pivot and move into this space where, you know, you really are stabilized in that and you offer that to people. Even like I watch your content on social media and sometimes it's like, ooh, yeah, that is a place for me to look at, whether you're talking to money or whatever you're talking to. It's like
Mm,
that journey for you to get to. I mean, we have to live it typically to get through it and then, you know, share it with other people. Maybe that's just my 6'2" coming out,
yeah.
but the 1'3", that's how they learn also. But yeah, maybe just that journey of, you know, going from trying to control. I'm sure I know
Yeah.
you, yeah, in your
Yeah.
career to evolving out and being in the space where you're at now of creating the business that you are. And I'm sure there's still aspects that want to try to control in moments, but
Oh, totally. There's a whole new level, and I'll touch on that, the vulnerable part of my learning in that piece. But I'll go back. So yeah, when I think back to the 9 to 5 world, and God, I know there's so many people out there that can really taste this place and like feel this place intimately. Um, how I noticed the shadow aspect in the business world of being an employee, speak to that 9 to 5 world because I feel like that's where it shows up a lot. Is I feel like being an employee and serving someone else's vision or mission is a part of the journey. There's a humility to that. There's a stability in that. It's ground up. It's putting the seed in the ground, learning what it feels like to be in a place of being guided and directed in a way that does serve a mission greater than self. I feel like there's a wisdom in that progression. I feel like there's maturity in that. And so when I look back at my journey of beginning as an employee and, cultivating a craft, I was a tradesman, plumber, gas fitter. I felt like there was so much value that now translates into my life that I get to use in the place where I'm in my more aligned gifts, where I'm in my zone of genius, which I'll touch on. But it was cultivated in the crucible of building the skills to be able to offer over stability. So when I look at the 9 to 5, it's so humbling, especially when I look, I feel like it's a perfect trade to use an example. And I feel this can translate to a lot of people listening in their own version of their work. But I literally would deal with shit, like that was a part of my journey. Like I would run drain cleaning machines and like shit splashed in my face. And it was such like what I had to cultivate within myself to understand this is a part of my initiation. How can I show up in the best way possible and do this job without resenting it and feeling like I'm a victim? So in the beginning of my journey, that's how I would orient is I'm just going to show up my best. If I can show up and do this service that needs to be done, someone needs to do it. If I can do it in a way where it's like, I understand that it's my role to show up in the best way possible. In hindsight, like when I look back, I'm like, oh, older self or like younger self. Oh, nice job, man. Cause there was such a cultivation there that I get to benefit from now. Is over the years of being in that 9 to 5 and over the years of working in what I call the zone of competence. So there were skills that I had, there were gifts that I have that like I was good at, but it's not what I was here to do for the bigger vision of like serving humanity. Mike isn't here to create the #1 plumbing company in the world. There's no shame in that, but that's just not my dharma. That's not my zone of genius, but I was good at it. It was my zone of competence. So I feel like a lot of you, listening may resonate to this piece of, but I'm really good at this thing. I'm good at what I do in my 9 to 5. And every 2 weeks, I can rely on that paycheck being in my bank account. There's just yeah.
I was just going to say, and I feel like the last year or 2 years, more and more people are feeling that pulled out from under them. And maybe it's just in my world, but that sense of security that was there for so long that kept them in that place of like, yeah, I'm good at this. I'm going to go through the motions. I've been there even with acupuncture. And then all of a sudden you start watching the economy do what it's doing, and not to like, I don't go into the fear of it at all, but it really has fed a lot and made a lot of my clients just question that piece of like, is this security real?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're naming that because this is what I notice in like the 9 to 5 world is there becomes a dependency and the shadow of control, wanting to control the level of felt sense of certainty in the nervous system, like inside of like, well, I really need that paycheck every 2 weeks, and I know what the amount is. I can rely on that. And there's a wisdom and there's a health in wanting that level of certainty. But like you named, the world is kind of breaking apart in a way where it's like, you can't just hang out there for 2 decades. You
No.
now actually need to, the invitation with the, and this is my perspective of it, the energies that are coming in are more available in this shift, this astrological shift that we have made. The energy is now saying we want more sovereign humans who have the capacity to be in the discomfort of growing and expanding more quickly. This energy is not going to let you hang out in the matrix for your whole life. Like you can choose to be there.
I think it was more comfortable for our parents than it will be for us. And then the next generation's just like, fuck this, absolutely not.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree. And it's like that shadow control, this is when I like that. I love that you named that. Let's go there. If the previous generation messaging that was inlaid was get a good paying job with a good pension, with good benefits, like there's the stability. And the way that, the collective consciousness has evolved, it's like there actually aren't very many pensions available anymore. And there isn't stability in it. It's terrifying of how vulnerable that system is. And there are no benefits in a lot of places, or like if they are, it's like they're changing, there's, lessening it and cutting. And there's just that stability that was available in the previous generation, there was a wisdom in that. It's not available anymore.
Yeah. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, I've had 3 friends either just get like overnight let go, laid off, or cut their wages in half. Yeah. So it's like, you're being thrown into that anyways. And I look at, if we're going to go to like Fort McMurray, it's like last year when I was there was 2 weeks where they were doing 1,500 layoffs over like a month. And these people were coming in, just like people that had been there their whole life were like, some of them were a couple, like less than a year away from retiring. And it's just a different energy to be your retirement. Instead of having a retirement party and being given a gift, you're given like, here's your severance. Your computer's been locked. You have 5 minutes to get out of here and you'll be escorted out, Oof. So it's even those people that are like my parents' generation that really put everything in. Yeah. I even watch my parents now. It's like, oh, we're taking more out of our RSPs or out of this, and watching like how much that money actually translates into our current day is very little, is not what they anticipated all of these things would mean anyways.
Yeah. Just the pain of that piece of that stability isn't there anymore. The stability now, the invitation, how I notice it. God, I felt the squeeze, and you've watched this journey for me of being in Fort McMurray and, being in a really high paying job, the most stability that you could have in working for someone else, worked for the municipality, amazing benefits, pension, you name it. but what was interesting is it was so comfortable, it was so safe in so many ways that it hit this place of atrophy for me, because it was so safe and secure. And there was the shadow. The way that my shadow expressed here was, I wanted control of my finances by just leaning in and relying on how easy it was for that to just show up. But then my soul started to atrophy. I wasn't refining my true innate gifts. And this is where I bring in the zone of genius. I felt like that was where life invited the shift. It's like, okay, you've capped out at what you're capable of doing in working for someone else. You're trying, and I remember it, I would try to bring in these gifts of shifting the culture, trying to shift mindset and being like, hey, this system isn't really attuning to everyone's relational needs here. Like, that's how my inner consciousness was playing out. And then so, how my gifts started to express more is, for every Thursday I would do a juicing at home. And I'd bring this huge like barrel of juice, and I'd make fresh organic juices for all these employees, and I'd put little motivational quotes on the glasses and leave it on people's desks. And that helped shift the culture for me that I was wanting to experience. But then there became this place where, yeah, but I'm wanting to bring more of this. I'm wanting to bring more energy to spark people into enjoying what they're doing and like finding their gifts and breaking out of the system where it's like we're being limited. And I couldn't shift the whole culture. It wasn't possible. And then so my soul started to feel defeated. I didn't have control over that environment. My gifts weren't being welcomed in the way that I was really wanting. And then it hit this breakdown point of seeing and accepting, oh my God, I have to take the leap out of here. Now I'm almost being controlled. I'm allowing I'm not a victim here. I allowed myself, because of what I was wanting control of was the certainty of having that paycheck every 2 weeks that was so big and easy.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no. In my mind, I was like, I can't let go of this. How am I going to repeat this number? How am I going to make this amount of money? And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, is like, but I've spent so many years of my life getting to this place. Like, how do I let go of this?
And will I have to rebuild from the bottom up?
Yeah. And that's a frightening place to be. I know that one. I hung out there for a while. And, for everyone listening who's in that place, I want to just highlight, and I wish someone had really inlaid this message to me from what they've lived and experienced on the other side, is letting go of that, like trusting the energy, the flow of energy. So if you're in that 9 to 5 and it's really painful and it's really uncomfortable and the boss is putting you down or whatever it is, if your environment isn't enjoyable and there's like this, you feel like you're in an abusive relationship, that's like how, my language here is, that's the divine offering over you the bridge to transition into using your zone of genius. You've been initiated. It's time to actually bring your gifts to the world, which is going to be frightening because that means being seen more, heard more, sharing your truth that's different than others. It's bringing yourself into an environment. Mark Groves talks about this a lot when he's speaking on stage, is you have to build the capacity to being disliked. You will be.
Yeah.
Because you're challenging the status quo. You're here to bring something new and different that isn't like anyone else. That's terrifying.
Bingo.
But that's where the abundance lives.
Yeah. And I think this is the pivotal point for a lot of us when we go, like, I didn't know I was still people pleasing.
Right.
Until you take that leap, right? And then you're like, oh, I'm being called to create this extension of me, which has a unique frequency. I can't rely and hide between the business or whoever it was that I was behind before that was doing the people pleasing, that was like doing the, like, oh, just tell them this or just make up this. And I'm like, fuck no, that won't stand in my business. I just had a phone call this week where my practitioner's like, I don't want to treat this person just like something, how they treated these people or whatever. And I was like, okay, got it. Got on the phone and she's like, so why can't I come for this appointment? I'm like, she just doesn't really appreciate and respect how you've shown up for other people in the community. So I can put you in with somebody else if you'd like. And for me to say that was like, but that's what, I'm like, that's what I've cultivated. Practitioners that are like, this is not what I stand for. And I don't want this just because it's a client anymore.
I want to speak to that because, God, there is so much maturity in that. And this is what I find is so important when it comes to, God, it translates into this whole 9 to 5 journey into being your own, to creating your own business, is there needs to be that willingness to speak the uncomfortable truth, to hold people accountable and reflect back the part that is a blind spot, the part where there is this impact to humanity where someone isn't taking responsibility for how they're feeling, how their energy's showing up. And I love that you've cultivated a practice where because that's a huge testament, and I get chills here, is that's a huge testament of what you hold space for and provide the practitioners to feel safe enough to advocate for what it is that is true for them and how they want to serve and who they want to serve and who they're not willing to, and what I hear in that is like they're not willing to abandon themselves and their own felt sense of safety so that their gifts can actually be received. Like,
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah. That's how I felt. I was like, oof, I could put this off on the manager, but I feel like this is something that I actually have to stand in and be like, nobody in my past would have done this for me, and that's okay. But this is the frequency I want to bring to the world. And having that phone call, even with that person, there was no emotion or judgment. Like, I was like, I don't know. I didn't get into the details of it. This is just how she feels. And I just want to stand up for what she needs. And I apologize if this brings anything up for you. And I could just feel her little girl like crumbling inside. And I was like, oh, I feel you. And that's the invitation that I also offer you, is like, can you be with that and choose differently? Both people, the practitioner and myself, are giving you an opportunity without emotion to just choose differently. It's a business owner. It's like, this is where I stand for. It's like, no, we can't create from this space of, I never want my people to feel like I felt in my 9 to 5, in my, and when they do, I want them to feel empowered enough to choose differently and leave, if that's what it means, or choose differently, communicate with me, or,
Yeah. And that's what I hear in there too, is that's radical self-responsibility for what it is that's wanting to express in the world. Like true help, like the practitioners that can support the most are the ones who will radically speak what's true for them, knowing that that's like, you can't serve someone who's not willing to look at what's happening for themselves. And there's no shame in that. There's no judgment, but this is the invitation. Like this is there needs to be that mirror. Like this is what's so interesting when it comes to this, is there's a lot of shadow in the 9 to 5 world because there's so much caretaking and people pleasing, because there's a dependency of, it's so fascinating of how I watch it play out, is like there's this dialogue of that. And it's not everyone, but it's a common dialogue in the employee world, is that they're victims. Oh, I'm being treated this way, and and this, and then so and so is that, and there's lots of gossip, and there's like, hanging around the water cooler or the coffee, whatever, and then just like talking shit about everyone and how they feel and they're being treated. But what's being missed and not reflected is you are responsible for your life. And I get it. There's love and compassion of like, there's a little kid in there that didn't get modeled probably how to do this in transition. But then there's the place of, okay, you need to take that little kid that lives inside of you somewhere and have that held so that you can actually start making responsible decisions from your adult. Like, you are actually responsible for your environment in life. If you're living somewhere that, like, if you're working somewhere where you're not being treated well, you probably lived in an abusive environment and you're just playing it out in the external world. But you actually now have choice. You actually have will. You can actually go and get supported, work with those layers of collapse and shutdown in your nervous system and that freeze that's in there, and actually mobilize towards the thing that you do want, that where you will be treated well, where there is health. Like, and that's what I feel that you're bringing in there, is like empowering the practitioners to be able to bring the health that they've cultivated in themselves. Because if someone can say that, if someone can share, I'm not willing to work with that person because of how they're showing up in the community, that's someone who has touched those younger vulnerable places, have built a relationship with them, and allowing that younger vulnerable wisdom to express through the adult of, I'm not okay with that. I'm not going to support that. If you want to take responsibility and show up different, then I'll support you. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's so much gold in there. And I love that you touched on the piece about if you're in your 9 to 5 and you hate it and you're starting to become the victim, or you're like, this corporate, like, they owe me this. I shouldn't have to work. Like, I see this happen a lot. Mm-hmm. And this probably means you've overstayed the relationship.
That's right.
If you're in the space where now you need to get back at them, you're going to work 4 hours and charge them for 8, and you're going to boom, boom. We've all been there, like, no shame. But, something my mentor in human design taught me that really stuck with me is like, the moment that shifts, that you feel that, it's our responsibility to change the relationship. Does it need to end? Does it need to be communicated? What needs to happen here? And then however it's met might dictate the direction that it goes, whether it has to end. It doesn't always have to end, you know, like sometimes that's our nervous system too, that's like hasn't had it happen the other way. So we're constantly almost initiating unconsciously or subconsciously those endings, right? But we have to take responsibility. I don't care if you work for a big corporate. Like a big corporate probably started as a small business. There's no shame when people say like, "Oh, I want to support small business." I'm like, I also want to cheer on the motherfucker who took the small business and grew it all the way up there and now is sitting there and receiving and, you know, taking all those projections, because sometimes, yes, there's some shitty work culture and there's some things in there, but there's some people that are actually really happy working in that environment, right?
True. Yeah, that's true. And I feel like, you know, this is the healthy evolution is I feel like there's a lot of corporate structure that's being invited to welcome in and attune to the ones that have built that have co-created the building of that huge, immense structure. You know, it's like, that's like, I feel like what we're in now in the big business now. You know, even if it's someone who's in a leadership role or whatever, you know, look at Tony Robbins as an example, or, you know, these people where they're kind of the business, but they're co-creating it. They have roles. They have someone who's running the manager role. They have someone who's running the entrepreneur role. Tony talks about this. He's the creator. He's here to create.
Absolutely.
He shows up and does. That's what his piece is. And there's an attunement to everyone's roles and responsibilities and the gifts that they bring. And I feel like the corporate structure from the Industrial Revolution, that was kind of stepping over and squashing whoever's needed to get that big. And now the invitation is to bring in, hey, let's make sure that everyone who's in these roles of management and seniority, that they have leadership skills, that they have relational skills, so they can welcome the gifts of the peon, the people who are younger, or not younger, sorry, but are in those lesser roles. They're not less important, but every one of those roles adds value. And I feel like what we're all being invited now is, how do we welcome and acknowledge and notice where the gifts are so that everyone's feeling fulfilled in this mechanism?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's the piece that's outdated. Sometimes it's like not necessarily the corporate, it's, you know, corporate themselves resisting allowing that to flow through, or allowing the, you know, pieces that just want the hierarchy instead of, you know, how do we cultivate this? But I think there is a lot to be said. I mean, anybody who's run a small business or is an entrepreneur, runs their own business, you know that there's a lot to be said for getting a paycheck and your benefits and whatever, your vacation pay, and walking out at the end of the day as well.
Oh,
But
yeah. And there's so much beauty in that. And what's interesting is there becomes a point where that's the limiting factor. That's the thing that actually ends up becoming the self-sabotage, is the attachment or the projected belief, you know, this projected story that can be created internally of, well, you know, I've got it pretty good. Like, I actually enjoy what I do here. And yeah, that may be true. And you don't have to grow and expand out of that. Like, you can hang out there. Like, maybe there's that joy and satisfaction in it. And, you know, if you're tuning into this, my imagining is you're the person who's not that, and you're wanting to grow and expand. You're just, you know, needing the next steps, needing some new perspectives. And it's like, there's this invitation to start acknowledging and feeling the feelings about, what have I accepted?
yeah.
What am I actually accepting right now? Where am I not, you know, like, where am I not looking at the full truth or the full picture, because I'm actually afraid of taking a bigger leap into myself? Because working for someone else is leaning into the belief that someone has projected onto you of, this is your role and your value, and this is how much I've decided you're worth.
Oh, yes.
But then to find that place inside where it's like the discomfort, or like, it can kind of play out in two different ways. There could be that place of like, where it starts to be the fight against the system. Really, in the root of that is like, I'm not feeling valued here. And so it's like that you can utilize that energy to mobilize that fire into creating a pathway where you can decide what you end up receiving with the worth that does live inside of you. But it's not anyone's responsibility to do that. And fighting against the system is the place where you actually don't feel your own value and worth. It's that little child of like, look at me, see me, absolutely. I am worthy. And it's like, that's not their job. Like this is your responsibility. And then there's that other place, and I know this one too, of so comfortable. Like where when I was in Fort Mac, there was a place I had created this hologram of like everything's really good, where it's, I'd meditate for 3 hours in my meditation closet. I'd connect with you, we'd pull like tarot cards, and and then I'd go to my 9 to 5 and I'd make a really good paycheck, and I'd bring juices to bring in some more fulfillment of adding more value, but I just kept repeating that cycle over and over and over and over. And I was so comfortable of like, oh my God, I'm building my finances. I've got, I'm breaking 7 figures in stocks and investments. I'm like, I've got, this is good. But it wasn't until I met my partner, Courtney, where she brought in because she lived somewhere else. She came to visit Fort Mac. And then it was like, she was so dysregulated being in my space. And I was like, oh God, I got the mirror. It was like, I got the mirror of like, I've built this delusion of how comfortable and safe I am, but it's actually not what I'm here to do in the world. Oh no, now I have to blow this all apart and actually take this leap into trusting my own direction. That's terrifying.
Yeah. I'm like taken back to that moment in your life when that happened. I remember that. And I think it was like a mirror to me as well, because I was like, what the fuck is he doing?
Yeah.
I was definitely not ready for that leap at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question would be like, through that pivot,
yeah,
what was the toughest thing that came up? Or like, what was the toughest piece that if you were to do it again, or you could support people through it, what you would do differently, I guess?
Ooh, good question. Good question. So the first piece that comes in for me that I would do different, it's the work that I do now, is I support people. The thing I would have offered myself is the receptivity and the receiving of more support. So I would have, like, what I would have brought in more was self-compassion of my human limitations of where I was at. Like the leap I took was huge. I was leaving the matrix, starting my own business, changing locations, joining a conscious partnership. Like there was so many moving parts. I had lots of support, but I would have brought like 4 more layers of support. Like in each area and category that I was growing into, I would have had a support system. That's what I would have done different. I would have really, like, I didn't have the cognitive awareness, or I didn't even realize this modality existed when I first took that leap. Was around like somatic therapy, and it was like body modalities. It was therapy that wasn't talk therapy. I would have leaned into someone who had done really embodied work and was living the life I was stepping into, who could actually, their nervous system could support a regulation in how dysregulated I felt.
Yeah, bingo. Which I think is the place that both of us love supporting people in now, because of being in that space of like chaos, and you can't really manifest. You can manifest, but it's a fucked up manifestation process when you manifest in that space.
Yeah, it's so clunky. It's like there's an easier way, and it's by accepting the vulnerability of being seen. How I look at it when I look back, I'm like, yeah, it's a vulnerable place to be. It's the insecurities, the tears, the terror, the shaking. Like my body went into so much that's why I stayed where I stayed. Like there's so much compassion for like if you're in your 9 to 5, like, oh my God, of course you're still there. Because when you leave, your body is going to start telling the story of like how terrified it actually is inside deep down. And this is where it's like such a benefit to lean into someone, like Krystal and the practitioners that she attracts, people like me who've done the work for, over a decade, is leaning into the nervous systems that can just hold this felt sense of safety of like, I see you, and you can shake, you can cry, you can talk about all the things you're so afraid of that are going to happen to you. And I'm going to be right here, and you're
Yeah.
okay. And I'm going to keep reminding you that you're okay and you're safe. Like,
And I think some people will think that we're crazy when we talk like that. Cause like,
totally.
I just think about the people, you know, what you're kind of taught or what I mean, people in my world don't think that at all. But I see a lot of people who, I don't want to say get stuck in talk therapy, but it becomes a really comfortable place for them. And then they stay there. And it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like that rhythm of the 9 to 5. It's like, okay, I see you. I love you. Like, that's great. But at what point are we going to like dive into the body and really actually let these layers be felt, instead of, you might leave your 9 to 5 and be like, I feel great. I want
Yeah.
to dig underneath there. Like, yes, you
Yeah.
probably feel liberated. You feel these things. My one friend that I was just talking to down south, um, they basically like gave her, you know, locked her out of her laptop, sent her an email like, la di da, have fun.
Oh,
We'll talk, you know.
ouch.
But, and she's like, I feel free. But then she was like, we were kind of backtracking. And the night before, she knew it was coming because her boss had kind of let her in. And she was like, stayed up late working and doing all this stuff. She's like, what the fuck was I doing? And I'm like, of course you did. Of course you did. You were still like,
Yeah.
you wanted to like fight for your worth. And, you know, like all of these pieces of your inner child were just like, or like, you know, worthiness, you're, you know, from that to all the things that have come up in her relationships. But it's like, at some point you got to get in and feel it instead of just like talk it out, I would say.
Oh, yes. And like pull out the energetic, bold highlighter for that.
Yeah.
Because, yes. And like, I feel like a lot of people that get stuck in the transition are the ones who start looping in the shame of not taking the leap, not making the leap. And it's like this, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? You know, you should be. And it's like this inner critic gets fed so much ammo, so much food, fuel to just like put down. It's not helpful. This is why I got into the field of work that I got into, because when I leaned into support, when I hired my first high ticket coach, when I started to see people like you who were doing energetic work, who did have emotional capacity to see
Some days.
past. Yeah, most days. This is what I've always appreciated so much, is like Krystal has this capacity to like see through the stories I tell myself and reflect back like that higher potential that I have, the gifts that I do carry, what I am actually being, like what I am here to do. Like, fuck, we all need that. We need those reminders in the humanness, the shadow part. Every single person has shadows, a lot of them.
A
We don't
lot.
just have one, we have a lot of them. And that's what we're here to learn about, to alchemize, to move more into that creative energy and that creative expression. And, you know, I am a strong advocate for this. You know, going back to your question too, of what else would I do? I would get hyper focused instead of what was wrong with my 9 to 5 or the victim story of where I was at, or like the beating myself up of why I'm not taking the leap. I would be hyper vigilant about finding soul tribe and soul family where people are doing the thing and are willing to expose the vulnerability. They are sharing where they're currently at and supporting each other, being a part of communities, being a part of something that will assist in a compassionate way. How difficult it is to actually take the leap. There's a reason why 97% of the world lives in the matrix. It's terrifying to trust God, to trust the
Yeah.
divine, to trust the universe,
To
of like,
trust.
what will you hold? Will you have me? Like that corporate structure that you were part of or whatever it was, it's like it does have you, but it doesn't have you more than that divine that wants to support you into the life that you know you want. Those dreams inside of you do want to express. You just need to be supported and in connection with the right people who can remind you every one of those days where it's like it's rainy, it's cloudy, it's cold, And like, yes, let your soul family, let your soul sister wrap you in the blanket and remind you of your strength. That is true strength. The strength isn't the story we tell ourselves of like, I've got to be able to do this, I should be able to do this. Fuck, the strength that I see, that I admire so much, is the one who can go into that really tender, vulnerable place and allow support to come in and be held there.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. Two things. One other thing is like, for anybody who's feeling this in relationship, I would say it's the same thing also. Like if you're feeling
Yes.
stuck in
Oh,
relationship and it's like that same piece, same thing. You have to tap into support. You have to let somebody see you, feel you. And I think the most beautiful thing is when we can do that with like, so yes, support. If you can get the support and tap into those people and pay for support, I think that's a beautiful place, because I can go there and I don't feel like I'm unloading or putting something on someone. Like as a practitioner, I know that that's like welcomed. I find practitioners that
yeah.
are in their integrity, they're charging what they're charging because they know that's the energy exchange and they're showing up for me.
Mm.
So yes, and if you don't have the funds, or that's a space where you're like, but I don't have access to that, that doesn't work for me. What about us who don't have the accessibility? Build that tribe. I think about like what Courtney's done with our niching magic, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a whole fucking mastermind that you
Yeah.
can put together with the right people, and you have the accessibility to that, to like tap into. It might even just be like one person in your world where it's like you actually have the responsibility, both of you, whoever's involved, to say, hey, do you have the capacity for this? I'm moving through something. Can you support me through this? So that it's
Mhm.
actually this beautiful container that can be created, and whether that needs to happen in like a week or whatever, but you can create this. This is everything I'm doing in my school community and like building out this, become your own practitioner. Yes, practitioners are great. Yes, we're all here to support you and we all have our special gifts. And part of the responsibility, like the radical responsibility that you're going to need to step into your business, to step into the relationships, to all of it, is to not always have to call a friend when shit hits the fan. To
Yeah.
build that in your nervous system, to build those tools, and to be able to say, like, I had a moment yesterday where I was like, fuck me. And I was treating somebody when something came up, and it was like, no, I have the capacity to put that in a box. I will come
Yeah.
back to it later. And if I need support, I will seek it. But right now, I am able to hold this capacity and container for someone, and then go be with that and decide, do I have the tools? Do I need support? But like, we really need to start building. If you want to hold a business where you can let somebody leave your business, enter your business, and have it mean nothing about you and all of the things that happen within that business, and know that none of it means anything about you while you're taking responsibility for what is about you, you have to cultivate these tools. I watch so many people get wobbly in their business, in their practice, in their coaching, and whatever. And it's like one thing happens, you get a bad review, or somebody has an opposing view or whatever. And there's no, like, they spew it out to the world. This is where like capacity isn't just a fun thing that we cultivate.
Yeah.
It's a necessary fucking thing for success.
Oh, yeah. Fuck yeah to that. Oh, I just love that download. And there's so much resonance there's just so much truth in that. Like there's like your truth, Krystal, but there's universal truth in that, where, this invitation is that I feel like is playing out for all of us. Like this is the pivot party we're all, becoming a part of, is we're being asked to pivot into radical self-responsibility, maturity, resilience, and capacity in the nervous system. This isn't just an idea or like, oh, I can do the thing. It's like not thinking about the thing, dreaming about the thing, it's doing the thing. And in order to do the thing, we have to accept where we're at in our bodies and start to relate in the places that we're needing support to build the resilience. That's how resilient is built. It's being in connection with someone who has a bit more of the resilience than you've ever experienced in your body in the places. So if it's in your intimate relationship, you need to relate with someone who's really figured out some things in relationship and that are living it. That was where you get the download. If you're wanting to embody more of, your confidence in your body and have that capacity that Krystal so beautifully talked about, that's required as a practitioner, is to table your material so that you can show up in service, and then to come back to it when and if it needs to be readdressed. that happens by relating with someone who has that in their body, who has figured out how to do that. That's where our nervous system learns. Toddlers or, kids are such a good example of showing this is how our nervous systems work. Like I went out with Cedar and we were hanging out together, and, he was wearing his onesie with this kangaroo pouch, and I was wearing my hoodie with a kangaroo pouch. And we get out on the car and we're like, hey, buddy, you want to go on an adventure? He's like, adventure. Yeah, Papa, let's go on an adventure. And then as we walk out of the house, he looks at me and I put my hands in my hoodie pocket, and he stops and he was like studying me. And then he looks down and he puts his hands in his little kangaroo pouch. And then the whole rest of the time of us hanging out, everywhere we went, he made sure that he was like putting his hands in his kangaroo pouch, because that's what his nervous system is learning. It's inspired. There's an aspiration, there's an inspiration of what it is that I'm doing. And he wants to feel that experience. And so he does it. This happens forever in us as human beings. This is why it's so important to be connected with the people that are modeling or mirroring to us the qualities that we're wanting to feel in our bodies. And, Krystal named it. It's like, I feel like right now the pivot is just learning to discern what's needed in the moment in the acceptance of where we're at. So there's a time where you'll need to hire support and lean in and have that one-on-one. There's going to be times where maybe you don't have the funds, and accepting where you're at is, like what Krystal named with our niching group. It's a free group. Courtney, my partner, initiated this group, and then there's a bunch of us amazing humans that are in there supporting each other, learning together, and it's free. We get to receive what it is we're needing with where we're at, and it's free. Everyone has the capacity. If you're listening to this, you have the capacity to lean in to your confidence, to lean into your power and that vulnerability, and ask someone to be a part of a mastermind, to start talking about and jamming about, like, hey, I feel like we're in the same situation. We want to leave our 9-to-5. Let's be allies in this. Let's reflect back to each other the gifts of maybe where we're being invited to go. Let's come together and figure this out. And if that feels too edgy, God, we're in this abundance right now of so many online communities that are very low ticket entry points, really small price points, probably, your week's worth of coffees. You could go join an online community where they're so passionate, so devoted to doing the thing and to help you doing the thing. Like, that's what it's about. It's creating the friendships. It's all these layers. And I love that you named it, because what I really hear in what you're sharing there, Krystal, is all the layers that are required to pivot into this new reality of being a human and a leader. No really impactful leader can do it on their own. No. Not meant to. And so what are the layers? What's your soul family? What's your friend system? What's your community? Who's your therapist? Who's your coach? What's the team required to support you to lead others?
Yeah. Bingo, you nailed it. And your body, and really trusting what season you're in, not going to the appointments because you think if you go to Acu and then your therapist and then your breath work and then that then you're going to be successful. It's like, you got to be embodied and be like, what am I needing and seeking? And what am I actually craving? Giving yourself space, which I think is a hard thing for people to do when they're starting a business, because you're still transitioning out of that energy of, I must do this to be worthy. So you're still probably bringing in a little bit of overwork and these things that you're like, oh, I'm doing all the things, so this is going to work out. I can feel the stability underneath. I know that was when I went on my own. Oh, I treated 18 people today. So that gives me some stability in my system. And then the next step was leaning out of that, right? But it comes in phases. So we still have to give our self space. I don't care if you just started a business and it's the first year. And I just had a conversation with someone who was speaking about another business, and she's like, well, you better not be fucking paying yourself. It's your first few years of work. And I just shut down. I was like, I never built a business where I was going to put in 5 years to not take pay out of my company. Absolutely not. Neither. But that is stages of nervous system. So you have to see how that's going to work for you. But the way when people ask me, what's this trajectory you're on? How are you getting this faster than most of us? Or I have other people, business people that I treat that are you're doing something differently than me. And they're at retirement and like, you know, people that I really am inspired by. And they're like, but if I was you, I love that you're just out there like living. It's like, yeah, that's a non-negotiable. But if you want that in the speed that we're doing it, that's why we have these people. You know, that's why I even think about like, why do I charge what I charge? It takes energy. Like there has to be an exchange for what I'm showing up to support you through, to hold you through, to like hop on the phone and say, okay, shit, you're going through this right now. This is what's coming up. But like, I have to have space in my own body. I'm not just sitting here spewing shit at you.
Yeah.
I'm like in it with you, you know, like
Yeah.
that's like, I'm out in the woods and then I'm like, oh, okay, I got to like tune in and download for this person. Like that's when I think about, you know, we then talk about everybody wants to be a coach and everybody wants to do this in the online space. But it really is like, yes, there is a lot to like weed through, but energy doesn't lie. So go find those people, you know, and if you can't find those people, it's like we said before, find your own network or like even me. I'm at a space where I'm really connecting with somebody that I used to work with. I'm not willing to invest that right now. I've like set up my life for the next year with the things that I've set it up for, and that's not a part of it. Well, she comes out with like a week-long, really low ticket offer. This time I went into it. It's like, you have to choose. Like, you don't have to spend the big money to get big impact or, you know, from people. It's like, you can buy in at these little, or like even the free masterminds. You can go in there knowing you're not going to buy and still take and soak all of that out of it. They're offering that for a reason. We're showing up in what capacity we have for a reason, you know? So it's like, I went into her 7-day offer and probably got as much out of it as her 3 months I spent with her years ago, because I was like, I'm going in with this. I know she has knowledge that and like channels that I want to receive. So, you know, you can, it's how much you're willing to also invest. It's not always, I have to pay more to get more. Show up for more and receive more.
Yeah, totally. I love what you're sharing there. And, you know, God, for me, in my experience anyways, there's places where paying more does lead into receiving more. But the only reason that happens, I've found in my own experiences, I've cultivated through the going in and doing the free masterminds, reading the books, doing that, honoring where I'm at. And getting to a place where I'm like, okay, but now I have these resources. I want to make a bigger leap. I want to take a bigger step. And what I've noticed is energetically, this is what I love about money, is I find every time I make that uncomfortable investment in myself, God just gives me what it is I'm asking for. It's like saying, I really need a lot of energy right now, so I'm going to invest a lot of energy. And this is where I notice the biggest impact and changes in my clients are the ones that just show up and be like, I'm terrified to make this investment, but I'm making it. They make the biggest shifts instead. And then there's the ones that fight me on the price or argue. And I'm like, then I'm not going to sacrifice the energy that I'm needing and requiring to resource myself to offer over this to meet where you're at. That's not going to be helpful. That's enabling.
Clunky for everybody.
That's enabling. It's clunky, you know, and then it's no one's going to win there. And then now I'm going to drop my resource. Like I still have to pay my high ticket therapist, my coaches, everyone that is supporting me to show up in this work that you're getting huge benefit from. Like that's is what I feel like is so important to know behind the scenes is like energy doesn't lie. There's sometimes where you're at, it's doing all the free things, it's joining all the webinars. And this is what I found, you know, in some of the clients I end up, you know, signing into my high ticket containers. And I'm curious if you've experienced this too, is like, they may have been nurtured by my free content for years.
Yes.
And then it just hit this place of like, I need to be in closer proximity to you and be in a deeper relationship with you to actually get that next layer of what I'm needing to like expand into myself here. This is where I feel like there's an appropriate investing in self, because there's lots of really expensive things that we could, you know, expansive things that we could invest into that aren't going to give you the results just because of the price tag.
Bingo.
Feel the energy, trust. And this is what I love that you advocate for and like model to people so often is your messaging of like, you're your own practitioner. And there's so much truth and wisdom in that, because trust the wisdom of your body. Like, this is what I love to encourage is like, if your body, if you get this pull in your heart or your attention or you just keep getting drawn to someone, your body's probably saying that there's an invitation to invest there and there's something that you're needing that you will get. But are you
Bingo.
willing? But are you
No.
willing to make that investment in yourself? Trust the flow of energy, because what can happen I've watched this too, is the flow of energy will be, maybe now it's time to take the leap out of the, time for money practitioners who aren't living that more expanded life, who are all struggling financially. Maybe it's time to now actually make that huge ticket investment in yourself that you've never experienced before and just see what happens. If your energy is attracted to someone, let's use you as an example here, Krystal. Let's say you've got a 50,000 offer and somebody, or 20,000 offer, whatever, this huge ticket offer. If someone's being drawn to you consistently, they're taking in all your free stuff, and they just keep being drawn to you, there's probably an invitation to like go closer, relate deeper. Like there's something that you'll probably benefit from there that's going to exponentially offer over the dividends of you making that investment in yourself.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
only thing that I would say, which you kind of touched on, was, I've made high investments and I've never actually regretted them.
Yeah.
But the first one I did because I thought it was going to fix something. I did because I thought it was going to get me something. And I didn't, like, she's the one that just now, like, I don't even know how many years later, I'm like, I would love to be back in her world, because the way I would show up would be entirely different. Like, I don't know why I had this vision. I was just at a space in my life where I thought, like, you pay the big money and somebody's going to do this thing for you, right? Like, they're going to make it happen. They're going to make it's their job to make. I was still working in a clinic for somebody though, right? So of course it was their job to make success happen for me.
Yeah.
So it's like, don't buy in for that reason. It's like what we're talking about. It's like, you have to have that feeling, and it's not a feeling of like, I'm pressuring you, you have 2 hours to make this sale. It's a feeling of like, relief, of like, I've found somebody. Like when I found my mentor, for me to hire somebody and stay with them for a year is like,
yeah, it's huge.
yeah. And when I found her, it was, first of all, just synchronicity. I was like frustrated and looking for, like, I landed on somebody else's Instagram and then was like trying to search on Instagram somebody who was a 6-2 manifesting generator. Nothing was coming up. Ended up on a projector's website. And I clicked on something to message her and I hit the wrong button, and it was actually a highlight reel. She was doing readings in human design for this woman at the time. And I ended up on her Instagram. She was a 6'2 MG. She was just like, her website was like, pitch me. Like, what do you want to make come to life? Like, pitch me and see if I'm turned on by it. And I was like, oh, and I just couldn't not. Like, I was like, okay, I'll start with a call just to make sure. But I already knew. And that's like, to me, that was just like, so there's so much certainty in that. And then it's like, yeah, I don't care. Like in that moment, I was like, this is going to stretch me because it's probably going to cost me money, but I don't care because I've already bought.
Yeah.
And because I just know my soul's pulling me to it. And I think something you said about, when you're feeling that pull to somebody over and over and over, it reminds me of travel. I get that all the time, like, and anybody who's been a bit nomadic or, felt the pull to go travel to a place in the world, that land is like, whether you're on the energetics of like that land is calling you to do some deep fucking work there, or you just know that you want to go there and be in that environment, and you get there and you have that feeling, it doesn't really matter, but it's the same thing, right?
Yeah. It's really, I love just like oversimplifying it. Like this pivot is following and actually attuning to this flow of energy that's emerging from inside, and then move towards the connection and the relationship and the things that energy is wanting to connect with, and like work with the fears and the resistance that's preventing that flow of energy. Like
unkink the hose. What did
unkink this.
Preston Smiles said something. He did a call in Adam Roa's group a couple weeks ago, and he said, that investment, he actually pitches people like, this is how much it is to work with me for 6 months or whatever. But that's actually, he's like, that's just their insurance policy on themselves. So I always say, is that a big enough investment for you, or do we need to bump it up? And I was like, I'm going to work that into mine right now. But you love that. I mean, the man's made wild success, and I've just never like heard somebody speak so authentically of like, I was like, oh, he's like the most evolved version. Like, not the evolved version of me, but like, you know, when you have that common thread with someone that you're like, oh, they're really letting their freak flag fly. And that's
Yeah.
that same thread of I'm like, oh, I'm going to follow this person and be in their world in the ways that I can and kind of like feel out if there's something more there. Like just follow that thread and continually unravel. Your soul's trying to bring you back home to like abundance, to just let you be free.
Yeah, I love that. You know, to thread this down to what Krystal's saying, that brings up in me is like, especially if it's in that 9 to 5 space or wherever, if it's in that business that's maybe outgrown and it's, you know, it's like hit its end point and there's that next thing on the other side of that fear is the thing. It's the prosperity, it's the abundance, it's the connections that you're longing for. It's taking that step, you know, and I use this one so frequently inside of myself. And it's that scene in Indiana Jones. And you got to take that step for the bridge to appear. And it's like so cheesy, but it's worth repeating because there's so much truth in that. Is like the fear that you're feeling of taking those steps, it's not real. It's real as a felt sense in your nervous system, and there's an acknowledgement of that. But just you have to take the step for the bridge to appear to experience all that thing you are wanting. It's available. It is on the other side. And I'm not just saying information. And, you know, and Krystal can speak to this too. We've stepped onto the bridge, and the bridge does show up. It is there. The connection's there. The service is there. It's there.
Yeah, and it's there quicker than you think, and it's like literally wanting to support you. And I know the first time, you know, it's not the first time because you've done this in your life and many other micro layers, but the first time you do take that macro leap in your career or relationship or whatever it is big and scary because we haven't cultivated that library and like really developed a relationship with it. But after the first time, like, I'm telling you, now it's like, oh, this fear's coming up. And I'm like, that's so fake. Like, let's go. You know, like the fear never goes away, but it gets to just sit in the passenger seat and like, shut up. You don't get to control the music. Like, I'm in charge here.
Yeah, totally.
Not shut up. I mean, sometimes you turn into it, but sometimes you just got to tell it to shut up.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never used this metaphor before, but it popped up. I'm going to use it. It's like, you know, that first time you go to make love, there's so much fear and insecurities that come up. But then once you do it a few times, it's like, it's the best thing ever. This is the pivot. The pivot right now is, yep, you're about to make love to, you know, something that you've never made love to before, and it's intimidating and it's brings up all your insecurities, and it's so worth going towards that and embracing.
I feel like you just foreshadowed my life in a different way, but
totally.
I hope.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Any last words? I feel like that's a beautiful space to wrap it up.
Yeah. Perfect closing. The climax. We've reached the climax, and now it's the yeah, just the final words is, you know, if you're still listening to this, there's some pull of energy, and just like keep trusting in that, in yourself, and being curious and following the golden nuggets and leaning in and seeing what gets invoked in you, exploring that, being curious about it, asking yourself, how supported am I? How connected am I to people that are helping me move towards the life that I'm wanting? Keep doing that. You're doing great.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your beautiful Saturday, probably family day, to be with me and share your wisdom with people, as always. And we'll close it off there. Have a lovely day.
Thanks so much, Krystal. This was so much fun.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. That is it. Be courageous, be bold, let anyone down but yourself along the way as you confidently activate or trigger the correct players in your pinball game. And with an open and defined heart, I encourage you to go forward with curiosity and create the depth and satisfaction in the entirety of your life, the entirety of your career, the entirety of the relationships that your soul came here craving, seeking, destined to create. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you left a review below. You can reach me at thekrystaleffect.com or on Instagram, the.krystal.effect. We'll leave that below.